Welcome to another episode of Chasing the Wind. I'm glad you came back because guess what? Medlin Mark is back. I'm going to get t-shirts made up called Medlin Mark, okay? Anyway, Andy's all over it. He's all over that. Medlin Mark. All right, so Andy and I, last couple times we've talked about Malachi on the counterculture. I hope you tuned into that one. Hope you tuned into our other videos too. And Lord may just be speaking to you. Like and share. Smash that like button. Get some merch. I don't have any merch anyway, except for those Medlin Mark shirts that are coming out. Anyway, I want to talk to you. There was something came up. They always come up for me when I'm doing counterculture, and Andy says, write them down. And I wrote them down, and I'm like, I have no idea why I wrote that down. But anyway, I'm going to do this one. I want to talk about how we approach our relationship with God from a very selfish perspective sometimes because we want God on our terms. Okay, and so we're here a couple weeks ago, Andy and I were talking about Malachi chapter 3, verses 7 to 9. Ever since the time of your forefathers, you have turned away from my decrees and have not kept them. Return to me, and I will return to you, says the Lord Almighty. But you ask, how are we to return? Will a man rob God? Will a man rob God? Yet you rob me. But you ask, how do we rob you? In tithes and offerings. You are under a curse, the whole nation of you, because you are robbing me. And I wrote down on a piece of paper our terms. And I think Andrew and I talked about that briefly, but I want to talk about that a little bit because that is how many people approach Christianity and their relationship with God. It's almost like a contract. Well, God, I accepted you now, so I don't hold any of my sins against me. Don't do anything, and let me just do what I want to do. We're good. I'm baptized. I went to the altar, whatever. I'm good. Here's one of the interesting things. I knew a person years ago, and I'm talking years ago. I'm not going to tell you how long ago. Long time ago. And he made the comment to me. I was a young lad, probably around 20 years old. So maybe it wasn't that long ago. Maybe it was just like a year or two ago. No, I'm joking. I just grayed early, that's all. I'll repent of that sin right now. Lord, forgive me. Anyway, just having a little fun here with Pastor Mark before he gets meddling. Because I'm going to meddle. He made the comment, it's very interesting. He goes, well, she's married, I'm not. He was talking about his wife. Needless to say, their marriage did not last, and they divorced. I don't know how long it had gone, how long they'd been married, but she finally had enough, and I got it. She was married, he was not. And he later told me, he goes, I just did it, because she was there for me when I needed her or something. I'm like, wow, what not to do. Note to self, don't do that. Okay. Our terms. We want everything on our terms. And we forget that there is a covenant relationship with God. Covenant is not just it's not a contract. It goes beyond a contract. And God says through Malachi, ever since the time of your forefathers. Now he is talking to Israel, and Israel's been around for quite a while at this point. And the prophecy against them is ever since your forefathers. That's a long time that they have not kept God's decrees and turned away from them. Ever since your forefathers. Wow. It isn't like, for the last 2 months you haven't been following me. Y'all have been having trouble with this from the beginning. And this is Malachi. This is right before 450 years of silence. Now, I go crazy sometimes when I feel like I haven't heard from God for 45 minutes, let alone 450 years of silence. And God says, you have been doing this since your forefathers. Translation, I can't remember when you haven't done it. Or how about this one? I'll be positive. I can't remember when you did do it. Either way you put it, they ain't doing so good. Yeah, that's doctor language there. Ain't doing so good. And look what they do. He says, but you ask. I think this is how it says. I think this is how I read it with Andrew. How are we to return? He says, return to me, and I will turn to you. And they said, well, how are we to return to you? There's two ways they could have asked that question. And I think that's how they asked it. How are we to return to you? How are we to return to you? Or they could say, how are we to return to you? How do we do this? Because we need to return to you. How do we do this? I don't think that was their response. I think their response was something like this. How are we to return to you? How would you say it? If God were to say to you right now, Wind Chaser, you have not kept my decrees since your forefathers. Now we go to Revelation and Jesus says, return to your first love. I have friends whose marriages were on the rocks because they quit engaging in the marriage. Everything else took precedence. We already have a problem in our country with the attack on the family. Okay, marriages and families. My wife and I will often do counseling with couples, and we will talk to them. There's a book, I can't remember the guy's name, and it's an interesting name, but the book is called Love and Respect. Egerstrom or something like that. It's a good book, based off of Ephesians 5. I think it's 8 and 9. Husbands, love your wives. Wives, respect your husbands. There's a cycle where the husband is supposed to love his wife, and the wife is supposed to love her husband or respect her husband. They're kind of interchangeable words there, if you could, ideas anyway. And they will come and they'll say, "Well, he doesn't show me love." And he goes, and he'll say, "Well, that's because she doesn't show me respect. And if she would show me respect, then I would show her love. Well, if he'd show me love, I'd show him respect. And until he shows me love, I'm not going to respect him. And until she respects me, I'm not going to show her love." Let me go back to last week's video, by the way. Last week's episode of Putting Away Childish Things. Because that sounds a little childish to me, doesn't it? And you know what? Here's what my wife and I will say to him. How do you break that cycle? Because you guys are just going to keep doing this, not respecting, not loving, and making this thing, well, if he does and if she does, then I will, and all this stuff. How do you break that? And here's what we say, whichever one of you is more mature. And they're like, what? What do you mean? What do you mean? Whichever one of you is willing to say, even if she does not show me respect, I'm going to show her love. Or that she says, even though he is not showing me love, I'm going to show him respect. Because we go into these things wanting everything on our terms. We want everything on our terms. We do that with our relationship with God, don't we? God, I know what you expect of me, God, but if you'll just do these things, how about that fox? Well, Lord, if you will just get me out of this alive, I will serve you, and then it doesn't happen. Or we come, I've had people tell me this. Well, I'll get right with God on my terms and in my way. That isn't how it works. That isn't how it works. We don't get to say, well, God, I'll just do all these things and then you'll do something. No. God says, here's what it is. You got to follow me. It's simple as that. Follow me. But we don't want to do that. We want God to follow us. How do we return to you? Will a man rob God? Isn't it interesting how God goes right to this area? Will a man rob God? Yet you rob me. How do we rob you? What am I doing? I'm not doing anything wrong here. It's not me, it's you, God. You're the one who has all these high expectations. God says, you're not bringing your tithes to me. Simple translation, you're not putting me first. You're not bringing anything to this relationship. You're just pulling from it. I said to a friend of mine one time, I might have told you this. If I did, you can tell me if I'm telling it right. I said, you know what? I said, this friendship, I'm in. I take my friendships very seriously. And I don't let go of them easily, sometimes to my detriment. I said, this friendship, I'm in. I'm 100% in. But I said, I don't have enough energy for both of us to bring energy for you into it and to convince myself you want to be my friend. You got to decide if you want to be in this friendship or not. And if you don't, that's fine. I just need to know where you stand. Because it's not that I won't be your friend, it's just going to look a lot different. It's pretty harsh, Pastor Mark. Yeah, it is. But I take my friendships seriously. Take my relationships seriously. And I take my relationship with God seriously. And I think that's what God's saying to them. I'm in. And God says that to every person. I'm in. As a matter of fact, he's so in. I'm making these the weekend before Memorial Day. And we will recognize those who gave the ultimate sacrifice for our country. So I can make these videos. Jesus made the ultimate sacrifice. He says, I'm willing to die for you. And yet we're not willing to live for him. Because we want it on our terms. We want just enough Jesus. Again, the rich young ruler. What must I do to be saved? What's the bare minimum? Just tell me how I can get in. I love people when they say, maybe I'm going to offend you this day. Oh, well. I've had people living together say, well, we're in a committed relationship. Nothing says committed like I won't marry you. That's pretty dark, Pastor. No, I think it's pretty light. I think it's pretty light. I love you, but I'm not going to commit myself to you for the rest of my life. I want to keep my options open. That's why we say in wedding ceremonies, it is not entered into lightly. It is not. My wife and I have been married for 31 years in June. Been together probably 32. Yeah, you're surprised as I am. She's put up with me that long. I have a wonderful wife. Hopefully she watches this and hears it. But I tell her anyway. It's certainly okay for us to come into a relationship with expectations, but we need to understand that the other person has expectations too. And God comes and he sets this standard. And he says, that's kind of where I've been on these. You can tell I'm kind of giving a lot of thought to these last few videos, but I think the days are such, folks, that we got to decide whose side we're on. It's like the little old lady, I remember hearing this story, a little old Southern lady during the Civil War. Union troops were marching by in front of her house, and she went out she was walking with her cane, just shaking along as she walked. And she stood there as they walked by, and she held her cane in her hand, and she shook it at them. And they just kind of rode her off as they marched by. Didn't really seem to do much good, but they knew whose side she was on. She was a Southerner, and she let them know it. Didn't make a difference to them, but they knew whose side she was on. Do people know whose side you're on? Does God know whether you're really in? And he does, by the way. It's a rhetorical question. Of course he knows. He's saying, are you in this relationship? Are you just kind of getting by? And I'll tell you how he knows, because he says to them, he goes, since your forefathers, you haven't kept my decrees. You haven't walked with me. You haven't been following me. You've been robbing me. And here's the ultimate thing that's being robbed. We're robbing ourselves. He says, you're robbing me. But in reality, we're the one getting robbed because we're not fully engaged in this relationship with God. And there's so much more he has for us. And we miss out because we're not fully engaged. Because we want it on our terms. He puts forth terms that are good terms. You don't need to even get a lawyer. God puts out these good terms. He goes, I'm all in. I want you to be all in. And we're going to do this together. Wind chasers, I'm going to leave it right there. Drop the mic again. Maybe I better stop for the day before I get myself in more trouble. Anyway, keep chasing the wind chasers. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for letting me kind of move along here and see where things go. But I love being on the journey with you. Thanks for joining me. Till next time, I'm Pastor Mark. Grace and peace.